Hi there and welcome back. It's Sandy McIver here, and today we're playing with the Alex Syberia Designs Spring Garden Set. There is a stamp set with lovely, lovely sentiments, a coordinating die set, and this awesome stencil set. There's 4 stencils in the set. There's a main one for the leaves, detailed, main one for the flowers, and then detailed. Inks I'm using today are from PinkFresh. I've got Bubblegum, Raspberry Blush, Aquamarine, and Tidal Pond. Also got some blending brushes in a variety of sizes. I have a half sheet of Hammer Mill White in my Misty, and I'm going to be banging up against that bottom left-hand corner to make sure everything is secure. And I'm starting off with the leaves. We're going to be using Aquamarine and Tidal Pond for the 2 colors, and I'm starting with the main stencil and adding the lighter of the blues, which is the Aquamarine, and blending it around in both directions to ensure that I get into all of the little nooks and crannies. And I'm using about a medium size blending brush. You could use a larger one if you wanted to. I didn't want to have a whole bunch of brushes hanging around in the video, so I just decided on these 2 smaller ones. So you want really good coverage. Then you're going to peel that back. You're going to pick up the detailed leaf stencil number 2, and we're switching over to Tidal Pond ink. And again, I am pouncing my brush at the top of the paper where I've got the extra and making sure that I get rid of that big blob of ink before I come in and tackle my leaves. And these are a little bit more detailed, so there's lots of little nooks and crannies to get into, but this adds the depth to the leaves once you're finished, and it's really, really pretty. They did a really nice job on these stencils. Okay, so just take your time. Make sure you go in both directions so that you get really good coverage. You can have a little peek to see if you like it. Look at those. Aren't they lovely? Now I'm switching out the stencil to number 3, and this is the large background color for the flowers. And we're starting again with the lighter color of the pink, which is the bubblegum, and coming in and swirling to add our ink blend. And I'm not worrying again about this being even. I like having some parts darker than others. I think it adds to the depth of the flowers. And there's very large overlays in the 4th stencil, which is the detailed one. So if there's any little mishaps in your leaves or in your flowers, you're really not going to notice it. It's going to cover it nicely. Again, go in both directions so you get the nooks and crannies. Pulling that one off and going in for my detailed with my Raspberry Bliss. And be careful right in that petal right there. There is a piece coming from the left-hand side into the center that's not attached on the other side. So it kind of swings a little bit if you push too hard. Just a little heads up there. Okay, and working my way around in both directions to make sure that I get into all those little pieces. And adding a little bit more on the right-hand side because I want it a little bit darker. And then again, second coat down on the bottom flower. And at this point I realize, hey, I forgot to do the little petals that are in there. So I'm just going to finish up the detail in the bottom here. I'm switching over to a smaller brush, and I'm going to go from the center out just to add a little bit of super dark color right close to the center of the flower. Okay, bringing back the first one, I'm coming in and doing the background shading in bubblegum on those little buds on the right hand side. And then again, the 4th stencil with the detail and Raspberry Bliss. So now we need to decide what color I'm going to do my flower centers. And I did end up deciding yellow. I thought about black. I thought about it hard. Okay, so Sunshine, Sweet Mustard, and Marigold are the colors I used. And we have the center of the flowers back on the leaf stencils, number 1 and 2. So I just finished number 1, putting in the background, which is Sunshine. Now I'm going to come in with the Sweet Mustard and add that little bit of darker shade. And then I'm going to highlight just one side, the right-hand side, with Marigold, just for a little bit of depth of field. So I'm happy with those. Now it's time to fill in a little bit of detail with the stamp set. We're going to do an overstamping, and I'm going to line up this beautiful stamp set right over top of everything that I have just stenciled. And I've got it attached to the top of my MISTI, and I'm using the dark ink of the two colors to do this highlight stamping. And I'm using just the corner of the ink pad. I've got it tilted slightly just to get in and add the ink to the stamp. And you've got a mirror image going on here. So what you're seeing on the left hand side is the far right on your stamp. So it takes a minute to kind of engage your brain into that. And that's one of the reasons why I do small sections at a time. And I'm switching over to a sponge dauber. So I have a little bit more control when I'm going in around my flowers, because I want to keep as much of the blue just on the leaves as possible. And it doesn't really matter if you get a little bit on your flowers. It actually looks kind of cool. If you do have a little bit of an over inking, you can just use a dry cloth to remove it. And I do that in a couple sections here. And I'm also stamping in smalls, or inking in small sections, because I don't want the ink to dry. But I'm ending up going over it a couple of times to get the depth of color that I want. And so you see I restamp everything at least twice, sometimes 3 times. So these are the little leaves in the center underneath the flower. I'm just adding a little bit of ink to that, and then kind of going back and looking to see where I need to do a second layer. And I repeat this a few times, working my way around the leaves until I'm happy with them. And this is the time that you want to just be patient and make sure you get a really nice coverage, because the detail that this adds is pretty spectacular. Okay, so just touching up those center leaves one more time. Liking that. I'm going to switch over to Raspberry Bliss, making sure my paper is nudged in that corner and coming in direct to the stamp with the ink pad, tilted just a hair so that I get the pink all over the flowers. It's pretty easy on the outside section of these large ones. I'm removing some of the pink that I got on the petals for the flower, or for the leaves, giving it a good stamp. And going to do the first one on the petals over on that right hand side. And if you're careful, you can usually get right in with just the corner of the ink pad, or if you're more comfortable with it, switch over to a sponge dauber, which just transfers the ink for you, and you have a little bit more control getting into those little nooks and crannies. But it's really cool when it's finished. You'll have to take my word for it, because you can't really see it up close. So there we are, we're all finished with the stamping. Now I'm going to get out the coordinating die, and we're going to die cut this little guy. Running it through my Platinum 6, I like to run it twice to make sure I get good cut, and then it just pops right out. And there we go. I additioned quite a few different pieces of cardstock to decide what I wanted to do. In the end, I decided to take all 3 of the blues, Ocean Breeze, Aquamarine, and Tidal Pond, and do an ombre background. So I'm adding the lightest color, which I believe is Ocean Breeze, moving on to the middle color, again pouncing my brush off so that I don't get any of those big blotches in my ink blending. You don't need to be too particular about this, because I'm going to do a whole bunch of splattering as soon as we're finished this. And so it doesn't really matter if it's even. You won't notice it when you get to the finished product. Okay, so I have all of those done. I'm liking that. Now I'm going to do some splatter. I'm getting out my Ganslatambi because I want to use the gold in that set. Adding a little bit of water to activate it, and I'm just going to let that sit while I activate my white. I've got acrylic paint, and I'm just going to add a couple of spritzes to that. And then obviously I'm splattering my paper. Do it this way first, and then I go directly from the spritz bottle. It's a distress bottle, so it's adding small and big blobs of water, just the way I like it. Mixing up my white paint, adding a little bit more. You want it fairly runny to be able to do the splatter. And I tested a couple of times just in the bottom right corner on my scrap paper that's in behind there. Make sure I got a good splatter going. I like some of the larger drops, so I try and not dilute it too much. And you go this way if you want large drops, and then tap it on your other hand finger if you want smaller drops. Okay, zooming in so that you can see it a little bit better, and just working my way around, making sure I've got good coverage. Just reaching up for my gold, giving it a little test on the scrap paper, and then adding the gold to it. Adds a nice little glimmer in the background because this has mica in it, so it's really, really shiny. Little bling. There we go. Love my background. I'm using terrific tape to hold this piece down. This piece is actually 3 3/4 by 5 because I like to have a frame sometimes around my artwork, and by creating a smaller card front, you automatically get a frame when you add it to your card base. Card base is A2 size, 4 1/4 by 11, scored and folded at 5 1/2. I'm just making sure my tape is all tucked to the back, and I've got my light at the top, my dark at the bottom, and I'm ready to go. So trying to figure out which way to put this flower, kind of auditioning it a few different ways. I kind of like that one. So I'm going to add some cut up foam squares to the back of my art piece. Got those all in place, and you want to lay it down. I want some overhang onto my white frame out the edge there, and that's what I'm trying to maneuver around, along with the cutoff of the branches at the top, trying to line them up as well. And then I need to move over a little bit to the left to make sure those buds on the right hand side are still on the card. So I did a little trimming on some overhang there, and we're good. If you watched my last video, I showed you a cool way to do a whole bunch of sentiments all at one time with a little bit of work. So I have my little bag of goodies shook out here so I can decide which sentiment I want to use. I have white on black and I have gold on black, and I'm kind of auditioning each one to see what I like, and also the different sentiments. I didn't really have any one in mind for this card, so I didn't really decide until the very end which sentiment I wanted. And there you go, there's the finished card. So I have everything that I used today listed underneath this video. There's also a link over to the Syberia Designs blog, where you can get a detailed description of how to make the card and the list of everything that I used. If you enjoyed today's video, please consider giving us a thumbs up and sharing it with your friends. And until next time, toodles!